I'm Celia Merzbacher, Deputy Director of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, or QED-C. And today I'll be providing a bit of an overview of the National Quantum Initiative, as well as the QED-C, which is working to grow the quantum ecosystem. So the NQI is a federal program that involves agencies from across the government. The NQI was established by the National Quantum Initiative Act that was passed in 2018, and today it involves all the agencies that you see on this chart. One of the logos that's not included here is the QED-C, which is not a federal agency, but a public-private partnership that I'll speak more about at the end of my talk. So the National Quantum Initiative has been going for about 2 years, and in August of 2018, the government put out this strategic overview that outlined 6 key policy principles. And I'm just going to organize my talk today around these policy principles and give you some information on what's been going on since last year at Q2B. So the first is focusing on science, and the federal government has invested a lot in research over the past year. It also is spending money on critical infrastructure, investing in equipment and facilities and people, and I'll give a little bit of an overview of that activity. The third principle is a focus on quantum smart workforce and the need for an educated pipeline of talent for this emerging industry. And there's some activities going on there. The next 2 principles are focused more on engaging with industry and economic growth. And the last one is about advancing international cooperation and the recognition that quantum is going on all over the world, and the US cannot be competitive without partnering and collaborating and cooperating with their national partners. So the federal government spending is shown here, and has been growing steadily over the past year and a half. In the fiscal year 20, which just ended, the federal government request was $435 million. The actual amount that was spent by Congress was almost $580 million. And the amount requested for fiscal year 2021, which just started in October, is nearly $700 million. So this is a priority of the federal government, and the investment is growing steadily year over year. In particular, the National Science Foundation spending is nearly doubled between 2020 and 2021, and the Department of Energy budget is also up significantly year over year. A considerable amount of this federal investment is being made in multi-institution, multidisciplinary centers that are across the country. And those are shown on this chart. There are 5 centers that were recently announced with support from the Department of Energy, and a number also with funding from the National Science Foundation. You can see those centers identified here. Each center represents participation and collaboration by teams from multiple institutions. The Department of Energy, the Department of Energy centers are led by DOE labs, but involve universities and industry as well. And the National Science Foundation centers are led by university leaders, but again, involve multiple disciplines and researchers in each team. So this is a significant portion of the federal investment, and these are 5-year investments at centers across the country. There's also a significant emphasis on workforce development, and over the last year, the White House has partnered with the National Science Foundation and with industry partners in a new national Q212 partnership that's focusing on supporting programs in the pre-college education area, the K-12 space. And this is recognized as being important as the sort of earliest part of the pipeline for talent development. Quantum has been largely an activity of researchers in academia and graduate programs, and now more and more undergraduate programs, but really needs to start at pre-college levels to get the interest sort of seeded and attract underrepresented groups to this emerging area where there are many opportunities in the future. Another of the important policy principles was international cooperation. And shortly after Q2B last year, there was a statement signed between the US and Japan on quantum cooperation. And I just quote a portion of that statement. The purpose is to harness the spirit of science, technology, and innovation to pursue cooperation and the mutual respect it confers, and to promote QIST. So this was a first step in promoting cooperation, in particular between the US and Japan. And shortly after, of course, the pandemic sort of slowed things down, and there perhaps hasn't been as much follow-on to this statement, but there's interest in pursuing that with Japan and other nations that are working in the area of quantum. So this is sort of a quick summary, a high-level overview of what's been going on in the National Quantum Initiative on the government side. And you've heard from some of the other presenters as well on what's going on in the federal agencies. I'd like to turn now to the Quantum Economic Development Consortium and to sort of transition from the government program to the private sector. I'll just mention that the National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee was recently established, held its first meeting. This is an advisory committee that was also called for in the NQI Act. And as you can see here, the objectives are to provide advice at the highest levels of government, to the President and the Secretary of Energy, and to the interagency programs and activities that are going on across government. You can see on the right all of the members of this advisory committee. These are non-government representatives for the most part, from industry and academia and some of the US thought leaders in quantum. So this advisory committee is called for by the legislation and will continue its work into the next administration. QED-C is an organization that also was started in 2018. It was called for in the NQI Act. And it is government funded, at least initially. We have funding from NIST and from the Air Force, but it's really industry driven. And there's an agreement between the government and SRI International to manage the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. The consortium brings together all parts of the quantum ecosystem. All stakeholders are welcome. And today, we've had engagement with more than 130 corporate participants, some 20 plus universities, in fact, more like 30 plus. Half dozen or more of the national labs are participating, and a number of other organizations, including professional societies. So there's very broad engagement with all the different players that are going to be essential to bringing quantum from research to reality. And the mission of QEDC is clear and simple. It's to enable and grow a robust US quantum industry and supply chain. In order to achieve this mission, there are a number of goals and objectives that we have laid out, and those are shown here. Our first goals are to identify and to develop strategies to address gaps in enabling technologies that are perhaps not classic or not quantum themselves, technologies like cryogenics, photonics, electronics, and so on, that are essential to the success of applying quantum science for practical applications. There also are needs for standards and benchmarks and metrics in order for measuring progress and assessing performance of technologies. And there's a cross-cutting need for workforce that touches all segments of the supply chain and ecosystem. In addition, the QEDC is to identify the big economically important applications and use cases. I think there's a lot of optimism and perhaps some hype around quantum, And the QEDC has the ability to provide credible information and to be a resource to policymakers and others who are investing in this area. We also do exist at the interface between industry and government, and we facilitate interactions between those communities. In the case of quantum, there's really a sort of parallel investment going on the federal government side that's significant and that I described earlier, and also at the same time, a heavy investment on the private sector side. And so these two investments and sets of activities really need to be aware of each other and coordinated. And so the final goal and objective is to provide government with really a collective industry voice, to make it easy for government to get in contact with the industry and to understand what its needs are broadly. So I'd like to highlight 3 activities of the QEDC in the last year, just to give you a flavor of what's going on. One of those is a quantum computing market forecast that was performed. And you may have heard Bob Sorensen with Hyperion Research, who spoke at Q2B this year, about the work that Hyperion is doing. QEDC commissioned Hyperion with support from Google to survey over 130 entities within the quantum computing space, both users and suppliers, and asked a number of baseline questions. This was really a preliminary survey and interview-based study to understand the quantum computing market and to be a baseline for future assessments. The findings of this study are shown here. It was determined that the global market was about 250 million in 2019, and there was an estimate, it's a little based on a number of assumptions, that that market is likely to grow to more than 800 million in 2024, and possibly much higher, but this is a rather conservative estimate, I would say. The top use that the community sees quantum computing being used for is research, and that's not surprising. Research in academia, research in industries. It's still very early stage, and there's research going on in a number of fields. The sectors, the business sectors in which quantum computers are expected to find application in the next 3 to 5 years were identified as the defense sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the financial sector, and chemicals. And those are sectors that are seen to benefit in particular from the ability to develop and use algorithms that are based on problems around optimization, physical simulation, and machine learning. Of course, these types of algorithms have application in many other fields, and the implications and applications of quantum computing are eventually expected to be much broader. And finally, user access to quantum computing is expected to be primarily through the cloud for the immediate future. I show a figure on the right regarding the market revenues by segment, and you can see it's quite even, or roughly even, among hardware, software, applications, cloud service providers, and so on. So the whole stack is really seen as being critical to the success of quantum computing. Another area that QEDC has been focused on is in cryogenic technologies for quantum. And in 2019, just over a year ago, there was a workshop held to bring together the community and do a roadmap and ask, what are the technology needs for advancing quantum, whether for research or for commercial applications in computing, in communications, in networking, in sensors, and so on. And the output of that workshop was reported in a roadmap and identified 5 priority gaps. And the needs to fill these gaps include materials, properties, databases, understanding and sharing information about materials at cryogenic temperatures. There was a call for a national cryogenic quantum technology laboratory, which would really allow many more users and researchers to have access to facilities and capabilities that would allow for progress to be made. The third gap was the need for lower or reduced size, weight, and power, as well as cost of cryocooler technologies. The technologies today are somewhat custom and often are quite bulky and inefficient. And so the need to improve on that is seen as a priority. And then standardizing and scaling, and finally, the ability to have high throughput to be able to accelerate test and characterization. QEDC is in fact launching a research program in this area to address these gaps, and that's happening among the members of the QEDC. And the last example that I want to highlight is one that is the output of a more recent workshop held in the fall of 2020 on quantum enabling laser technologies. And at that workshop, it was recognized among the laser community participants that the field is very foggy, and there are many laser technologies that are being considered and proposed for various quantum-based applications. And the industry doesn't know where to focus. They really put out a call for coming up with a way to sort of sort through and prioritize where to make R&D investments. Many of the companies have some ability to focus on R&D, but with limited resources, they are not sure where that focus should be. So QEDC is launching a new program to create a model and ultimately a tool that takes into account a number of factors that will allow us to help the investors in laser technologies, whether they are at laser companies, at government program offices, are investors in the private sector. It will help enormously in understanding where the investment should be made first. And if the tool works the way we hope it will be possible to update it, to adjust different factors and weightings to come up with the prioritizations that matter most to the user of the tool. So the factors that are going to be included are shown here, or some of them at least. Applications that require lasers, what the laser specifications are for those different applications, what the status of the current technology is, and how difficult or how much time it's going to take to reach a readiness level that will allow industry to take it forward, what the research market size or the commercial market size is estimated to be, and adjacent markets that could help leverage and defray the costs of advancing towards quantum applications. And finally, the cost to displace the currently used technology. These and other factors will all be important to weighting and prioritizing laser technologies and where investments should be made. So I'd like to just conclude by outlining the benefits that QEDC members realize. Obviously, joining a consortium allows the members to connect with other stakeholders, whether they're suppliers or customers or even competitors. We're operating in pre-competitive space, and so competitors come together and are really quite generous in sharing, because I think everyone recognizes that getting ahead will benefit all. It provides insight from those other participants and access to really subject matter experts from across the ecosystem. It also provides access to R&D funding as we do these roadmaps and are able to guide investment by the federal government and others. There's the possibility of getting access to R&D funds. And to the kinds of reports that I mentioned, the quantum computing market report, the full report, the roadmap for cryo, those full reports are only given to members. There's involvement with setting standards, and finally, access to qualified talent, something that everybody cares about. We've got resources that we've made available to our members to provide access to students. So go to the QEDC website, quantumconsortium.org. And for those of you who are not US-based organizations, non-US membership is coming soon. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye.